should have known better than to accept a private tutoring job that paid 3 times my usual rate. But when you're a 29-year-old adjunct professor at Yale drowning in student loans and surviving on ramen noodles, you don't ask questions when opportunity knocks. Or in this case, when opportunity sends a sleek black town car to pick you up from your cramped studio apartment in New Haven. The driver didn't speak, not a single word during the entire 40-minute drive to the waterfront district. He just held the door open, nodded once, and drove like he was transporting nuclear codes instead of a linguistics professor, clutching a worn leather satchel full of Italian grammar books. I should have been nervous. The address alone should have sent me running back to my safe, boring life of conjugating verbs for undergraduates who couldn't tell the difference between passato prossimo and imperfetto. But I'd convinced myself this was just another eccentric, wealthy client who wanted to impress his business associates with authentic Italian pronunciation. I'd taught dozens of them over the years. Lawyers preparing for vacations in Tuscany. Doctors wanting to read Dante in the original language. Opera enthusiasts who butchered every area they attempted. This would be no different, I told myself as the car pulled up to a converted warehouse that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. All glass and steel and money. I was so incredibly, dangerously wrong. The moment I stepped into the penthouse office, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The space was too quiet, too controlled. Men in expensive suits lingered near the windows, trying to look casual but watching everything with predator eyes. The art on the walls wasn't purchased for aesthetic pleasure. It was investment, power, a reminder of wealth that could buy anything. Or anyone. And then I saw him. Dominic Salvatore sat behind a desk made of some dark wood that probably cost more than my annual salary, reading something on his tablet with the kind of focus that made the entire room hold its breath. He was younger than I expected. 35 maybe. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on ancient Roman coins. Sharp cheekbones. A jaw that could cut glass. Eyes the color of espresso that hadn't looked up yet, but somehow seemed aware of every single molecule in the room. He wore his power like other men wore cologne. Subtle, expensive, impossible to ignore. Miss Brennan. His voice carried the faintest trace of an Italian-American accent, smoothed by expensive education, but not quite erased. Thank you for coming. He still hadn't looked up from his tablet. Professor Brennan, I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. Something about the way his mouth curved told me he'd been testing me, seeing if I'd correct him. But Sophia is fine. Is it? Now those dark eyes lifted, pinning me in place with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. I find that American women say things are fine when they mean precisely the opposite. And I find that men who refuse to make eye contact during introductions are either incredibly rude or incredibly arrogant. The words escaped before my brain could stop them. Sometimes both. The room went completely silent. Even the men by the windows stopped pretending not to listen. Then Dominic laughed. Actually laughed. A real sound that transformed his entire face from intimidating to devastating. I like you already, Professor. Please, sit. I sat. Mostly because my knees had stopped working properly. For the next hour, I learned that Dominic Salvatore was exactly the kind of student who made teaching both exhilarating and exhausting. He was brilliant, picking up grammatical structures with ease. His pronunciation was nearly perfect, probably from growing up hearing Italian at home. But he questioned everything, challenged every rule, found exceptions to every pattern I presented. Why does bellow change to bell before certain consonants? He asked, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Because Italian likes things to sound beautiful, I explained, falling into my teaching rhythm. It's euphonic. Phonetic flow matters more than strict grammatical logic sometimes. So the language breaks its own rules for aesthetic pleasure. His eyes never left mine. How very Italian. There was something underneath his words. An implication I couldn't quite grasp. Like he was speaking 2 languages at once, and I was only fluent in one of them. 3 weeks into our sessions, I still hadn't figured out what Dominic Salvatore actually did for a living. Import-export, his assistant had said when booking the lessons. But nobody needed this level of security for importing wine and olive oil. The men who guarded his building wore suits that concealed weapons with practiced ease. His phone calls, always taken in another room, lasted exactly 4 minutes. Never more, never less. And then there were the visitors who arrived after our lessons ended. Men in designer suits who looked like they'd watched too many mob movies and decided to commit to the aesthetic. Women who dressed like they were attending Fashion Week, but moved like trained athletes. Everyone who entered his orbit treated him with a mixture of respect and fear that made my academic instincts scream warnings I was too stubborn to heed. The university benefit gala was supposed to be my night off, a chance to wear the one good dress I owned and pretend I belonged among Yale's elite donors. Instead, I spent the evening watching my department chair fawn over potential benefactors while I nursed a single glass of mediocre champagne and calculated how early I could leave without being rude. Professor Brennan. I turned too fast, nearly sloshing champagne on my dress. Dominic stood behind me wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car, which wasn't saying much, since my car was a 15-year-old Honda that made concerning noises whenever it rained. "What are you doing here?" I asked, abandoning all pretense of professional courtesy. "Yale is very grateful for my family's charitable contributions." That slight smile again. The one that suggested he found the entire world amusing but would never explain the joke. "You look surprised, Professor. Did you think I spent all my time conjugating verbs?" "I think you spend all your time doing things you'll never tell me about," I said before I could stop myself. The champagne was clearly stronger than I'd thought. His eyes darkened with something I couldn't name. "Very perceptive. This is why you're an excellent teacher." We stood there, surrounded by Yale's finest, and the air between us crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with irregular verb patterns. The music from the string quartet seemed distant, underwater. Everyone else might as well have disappeared. "Your pronunciation is improving," I said, desperately searching for safe ground. "But you're still adding that American R sound to words that should end softer." "Show me." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and probably Italian and completely unfair. "Correct me, Professor." It was a challenge. A dare. And I'd never been good at backing down from dares. "Amore," I said softly, demonstrating the proper pronunciation. The R is barely there. It's more of a suggestion than a sound. "Amore," he repeated, his eyes locked on my mouth as he shaped the word. "Like that? Better, but still too hard." Without thinking, I reached up and touched his jaw, adjusting the position like I did with struggling students. Softer. Let the word float out. The moment my fingers made contact with his skin, everything changed. The heat of his jaw beneath my fingertips. The way his breath caught, so subtle I might have imagined it. The complete stillness that came over him, like a predator deciding whether to pounce or retreat. "Amore," he whispered. And this time it was perfect. This time it was dangerous. I dropped my hand like I'd been burned. Yes, exactly like that. "And what about curse words, Professor?" He was still standing too close, invading my space with casual authority. "You've been very careful to keep our lessons appropriate. But I grew up hearing my nonna curse in Sicilian. I want to know if I'm remembering correctly." "I don't teach profanity." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "But you know it. Not a question, a certainty. Your grandmother was Sicilian, yes? From Palermo." How did he know that? I'd never mentioned my grandmother, never discussed my family history. Catania, actually. Catania. He tasted the word, rolled it around. Beautiful city, dangerous families, old feuds that never die. His smile held secrets I didn't want to understand. "So you do speak Sicilian, not just Italian." They're not the same language. I was retreating into academic facts, using knowledge as armor. Sicilian has different grammar, different vocabulary. It's a distinct linguistic system. I know. He leaned in, his mouth near my ear, close enough that I could feel his words against my skin. Teach me something inappropriate, Professor. Something your nonna taught you when you were too young to understand why it was forbidden. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to maintain professional boundaries, to remember that this man was dangerous in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend. Instead, I lifted my chin and met his eyes. Why? Because I want to hear forbidden things in your voice. His honesty was more dangerous than any lie could have been, because I want to know what you sound like when you stop being proper. The music swelled around us. My department chair laughed too loudly at something a donor said. The champagne bubbles in my glass had long since gone flat. Vaffanculo, I whispered in perfect Sicilian, the profanity my grandmother used to mutter under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening. Go fuck yourself. Dominic's eyes widened. Then he threw his head back and laughed with such genuine delight that several people turned to stare. When he looked at me again, something fundamental had shifted in his expression. Again, he said softly, dangerously. But this time, looking into my eyes, Professor, say it like you mean it. I should have walked away, should have made some excuse about needing to network or finding the restroom, or literally anything that would have extracted me from this moment. But there was something in Dominic Salvatore's eyes that made walking away impossible. A challenge, a recognition. Like he'd just discovered I was fluent in a language he'd thought was his alone. You understood me. It wasn't a question, but I said it anyway, buying time while my brain tried to catch up with my mouth. Every syllable. He was still smiling, but there was something predatory in it now, something that made me hyper-aware of how isolated we were despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. Your grandmother taught you well. That's not textbook Sicilian. That's street dialect. Catania East Side, if I'm not mistaken. My throat went dry. How do you know things? He plucked the champagne glass from my hand and set it on a passing waiter's tray without breaking eye contact. It's my job to know things, Professor. Languages, dialects, where people come from, and what they're trying to hide. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur that only I could hear. And you've been hiding your Sicilian very carefully, haven't you? Polishing your credentials with proper Tuscan Italian, teaching from textbooks, being respectable. Being Sicilian isn't something to hide. But even as I said it, I knew it was partially a lie. I'd spent my entire academic career downplaying my grandmother's influence, presenting myself as a scholar of standardized Italian, rather than someone who'd learned the language, listening to an old woman curse at the television and gossip with her neighbors in a dialect that sounded like music and violence in equal measure. No, Dominic agreed. But being Sicilian in certain circles means people make assumptions. And you're very careful about assumptions, aren't you, Sophia? The way he said my name made it sound like a secret. You want people to see Professor Brennan, Yale credentials, published research, proper grammar. You don't want them to see the girl who grew up in a 3-room apartment in Providence listening to her nonna tell stories about the old country that probably shouldn't have been shared with a child. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. You investigated me. Of course I investigated you. He said it like it was obvious, like having a background check run was just part of accepting a tutoring position with him. I investigate everyone who enters my life. It's how I stay alive. He paused, letting that sink in. The question is, Professor, why didn't you investigate me? Because I'd been naive. Because I'd needed the money. Because some part of me had wanted to believe in the fairy tale of a generous client who simply loved languages and had money to spare. I know who you are, I said quietly. It was partially true. I'd pieced together enough from overheard conversations, and carefully worded news articles. Import-export was code for shipping. Shipping was code for controlling everything that moved through the ports. And controlling the ports on the East Coast meant you were either incredibly legitimate or incredibly not. Do you? His eyes searched mine, looking for fear, perhaps, or judgment. And yet you keep coming back. Keep teaching me. Keep sitting across from me 3 times a week and correcting my pronunciation like I'm just another student. You are just another student. But we both knew it was a lie. I'm really not. He was so close now that I could see tiny flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the expensive cologne, and underneath it something else. Something that reminded me of my grandfather's study. Leather and tobacco and old wood. I'm the man who controls half the shipping on the East Coast. The man whose family has had ties to Sicily for 4 generations. The man who can't afford to mispronounce a single word when I'm negotiating with families who still remember every slight, every insult, every broken promise from 70 years ago. The truth settled between us like broken glass, sharp and impossible to ignore. You don't need Italian lessons, I said slowly. You need to sound like you're from there, like you belong. Very good, Professor. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture so casual and so intimate that it froze me in place. I need to sound like a man whose blood is Sicilian, not American. I need to negotiate in Catanese dialect with families who don't trust anyone born outside Palermo. I need to understand every nuance, every hidden meaning, every cultural reference that could mean the difference between a successful deal and a war. His hand dropped away, but I could still feel the ghost of his touch. And I need someone who understands both worlds. Someone educated enough to explain the grammar, but street enough to teach me how to curse properly. I'm not street. The protest sounded weak even to my own ears. Your dissertation was on code switching in immigrant communities. He definitely investigated me thoroughly. You wrote 30 pages on how Sicilian immigrants in Providence maintained their dialect while adopting English, creating a hybrid language that allowed them to navigate 2 cultures simultaneously. You interviewed your own family members, recorded your grandmother. His eyes softened slightly. You are exactly street enough, Professor. You just pretend you're not. The gala continued around us. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet launched into something by Vivaldi. My department chair was probably wondering where I'd disappeared to. And none of it mattered, because Dominic Salvatore had just stripped away every careful layer I'd built around myself and seen exactly who I was underneath. What do you want from me? I asked. The same thing I've wanted since you walked into my office and corrected me within the first 5 minutes. He smiled, and it was dangerous and honest and completely disarming. I want you to stop pretending. Stop teaching me from textbooks. Teach me the way your grandmother taught you, with stories and curses and all the messy, complicated, beautiful things that don't fit into neat grammatical boxes. That's not how I teach. Then change how you teach. It wasn't a request. Because this proper, polite, academic approach isn't working for either of us anymore, is it? He was right. God help me. He was right. For weeks, I'd been feeling the frustration build during our lessons. The way he'd learn the proper form and then immediately ask about the street version. The way he'd push against every rule, wanting to know not just how things were said, but why. The way he'd watch me when I slipped, when I forgot to be Professor Brennan and became Sophia, whose grandmother used to swat her with a wooden spoon while teaching her that certain words were only for adults. If I do this, I said carefully, if I teach you the way you're asking, we need boundaries. Name them. We keep it professional. This is still a tutoring arrangement. Nothing more. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe. Or recognition of a challenge. Agreed. What else? You tell me the truth about why you need this, not vague references to business deals. The real reason. He considered this for a long moment. Around us, the gala continued its elegant charade. But in our small bubble of space, the only thing that existed was this negotiation. This moment of dangerous honesty. "There's a family in Palermo," he finally said. "The Cozzolinos. They control the western ports of Sicily. My family has been trying to establish a working relationship with them for 3 years. Every negotiation has failed because they don't trust American-born Italians. They think we've been diluted, softened by American culture. They need to believe I'm as Sicilian as they are." He paused. "In 2 months, their patriarch is celebrating his 70th birthday. I've been invited. It's a test. If I pass, if I can prove I understand not just the language but the culture, the unspoken rules, the 1,000 tiny things that mark someone as truly Sicilian, then we have a deal. If I fail, they'll never trust you," I finished. "Worse, they'll see it as an insult, and insults between families like ours don't end well." The weight of what he was asking finally hit me. This wasn't about business dinners or impressing clients. This was about walking into a room full of people who had made violence into an art form and convincing them you were one of them. One wrong word, one mispronounced phrase, one cultural misstep could spark something neither of us could control. "I can't teach you to be something you're not," I said. "You don't have to." His intensity was almost overwhelming. "I am Sicilian. My grandfather was born in Catania. My blood is Sicilian even if my accent isn't. You just need to help me remember. Help me be what I should have been if my father hadn't been so desperate to become American that he forgot where he came from." There was pain in those words. Old wounds that had nothing to do with grammar or pronunciation. This wasn't just about business. This was about identity, about belonging, about proving something to people who would never fully accept him, but whose approval he needed anyway. I understood that feeling better than he could possibly know. "Okay," I heard myself say. "But we do this my way. No more textbooks, no more polite lessons in your office. If you want to learn how to be Sicilian, we do it the way it should be done, with food and wine and stories and all the mess that comes with it." His smile was slow and devastating. "When do we start?" "Tonight." The champagne had made me bold, or maybe it was the way he was looking at me like I'd just handed him something precious. "My apartment. I'll cook. You'll eat. And we'll start with the most important lesson of all." "Which is?" I switched to Sicilian, letting the rough, beautiful dialect my grandmother had taught me flow out uncensored. Real Sicilians don't just curse when they're angry. They curse when they're happy, when they're tired, when they're emphasizing a point, when they're showing affection. The language of Sicily isn't polite. It's passionate. If you want to sound like you belong, you need to stop being afraid of being inappropriate. Dominic's eyes darkened with something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite danger. "I'm never afraid of being inappropriate, Professor." "Then prove it." I pulled out my phone and typed my address into a new message. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. And don't bring your security guards. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. I sent the message and started to walk away, my heart pounding with the enormity of what I'd just agreed to. But his voice stopped me after just 3 steps. "Sophia." I turned back. He was still standing there amid Yale's elite, looking like he owned the entire building, which he probably did. But there was something different in his expression now. Something almost vulnerable. "Thank you," he said in perfect Sicilian, "for seeing me." And that's when I knew I was in serious trouble. My apartment looked like a tornado had hit it. A tornado made of anxiety and second-guessing. I'd spent the 3 hours since leaving the gala, alternating between cooking and panicking. The tiny kitchen of my studio was filled with the smell of simmering tomato sauce, garlic, and the fresh bread I'd picked up from the Italian bakery in Worcester Square. My grandmother's recipe for pasta alla norma was bubbling on the stove, eggplant crisping in olive oil, ricotta salata waiting to be grated. I'd changed clothes 4 times. Too professional, too casual, too much like I was trying to impress him. Finally, I'd settled on jeans and a soft sweater, bare feet because this was my space, and I'd be damned if I'd wear heels in my own apartment. At exactly 9 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. Dominic Salvatore stood in my hallway wearing jeans and a black Henley, looking nothing like the powerful businessman from the gala, and everything like the kind of dangerous man your grandmother warned you about. His sleeves were pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms that had no business being that distracting. He held a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "You came alone," I said, stating the obvious because my brain had apparently stopped functioning. "You told me to." He glanced past me into my tiny studio, taking in the open kitchen, the futon that doubled as my couch, the desk covered in papers and books, the single window with its view of the parking lot. If he was judging the massive downgrade from his penthouse, his face didn't show it. "It smells like my grandmother's kitchen in here." Something in his voice made my chest tight. "Come in." He stepped inside, and the apartment immediately felt smaller. Not claustrophobic exactly, but charged, like we'd crossed some invisible line by doing this here, in my space, without the buffer of offices and professional distance. "Wine?" I took the bottle from him and tried not to think about how my hands were shaking slightly. "This is a 2015 Nero d'Avola. You know your Sicilian wines." My grandfather taught me. He was watching me move around the kitchen with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He said a man who doesn't know wine doesn't know Sicily. I poured 2 glasses and handed him one. Our fingers brushed, and I pretended not to notice the jolt that went through me. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was a monster." Dominic said it casually, taking a sip of wine. "Brilliant. Loyal. Would kill anyone who threatened his family without hesitation. But also a monster." He met my eyes over the rim of his glass. "That's something Americans don't understand about Sicilian families. We don't separate the good from the bad. We accept that people are both." I stirred the sauce, needing something to do with my hands. My grandmother used to say the same thing. She'd tell these stories about her father like he was a hero and a villain in the same sentence. I never understood it growing up. And now? Now I understand that survival means being complicated. I plated the pasta, the ritual of serving food grounding me, that the people who protected you sometimes did terrible things to do it, that love and violence can exist in the same action. I handed him a plate. "Sit. Eat. Tell me about your grandfather." We sat on my futon couch, plates balanced on our laps, and for the first time since I'd met Dominic Salvatore, we didn't talk about grammar or pronunciation or business. We talked about family, about grandparents who'd carried Sicily with them across an ocean and planted it in American soil, watching it grow strange and twisted, but still recognizably Sicilian. "My grandfather came over in 1952, Dominic said, twirling pasta around his fork with practiced ease. "Landed in New York with nothing but the clothes on his back and connections to people who'd left Catania a decade earlier. Within 5 years, he controlled 3 docks. Within 10, he was negotiating with families in Manhattan like an equal." "How?" I asked, genuinely curious, because he never forgot where he came from. Dominic set his plate aside, the food mostly eaten. He spoke Sicilian at home, cooked Sicilian food, celebrated Sicilian holidays, married a Sicilian girl whose family came from the same neighborhood in Catania as his. He became successful in America, but he never became American. Not in the ways that mattered. "And your father?" Something dark crossed Dominic's face. "My father wanted to erase everything Sicilian about himself, changed his name from Salvatore to Salvo for a while, until my grandfather threatened to disown him, refused to speak Italian at home. Sent me to boarding school. Tried to make me into some kind of American success story. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He didn't understand that in our world, forgetting where you come from is the fastest way to lose everything. But you didn't forget. No. His eyes found mine. I learned to code switch, as you would say. I can be American Dominic when I need to be. Proper pronunciation. Business school vocabulary. All the Polish my father paid for. But underneath, I'm still Sicilian. I just forgot how to show it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's what I need from you, Sophia. I don't need you to teach me a language. I need you to help me remember who I am. The vulnerability in his voice undid something in me. This wasn't about business deals or impressing dangerous men anymore. This was about identity. About a man caught between two worlds and desperately trying to find his way back to one of them. Okay, I said softly. Then we start with stories. Real stories. Not grammar lessons disguised as conversation. I'll tell you one of my grandmother's stories, and you tell me one of your grandfather's. And we learn the language the way it's supposed to be learned, through living it. For the next 3 hours, my tiny apartment became a bridge between two versions of Sicily that had never met, but shared the same bones. I told him about my grandmother's childhood in Catania, growing up in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone's business and secrets were currency, about how she'd learned to read people by their word choices, to hear the insult hiding inside a compliment, to understand that in Sicilian conversation, what you don't say is often more important than what you do. Dominic told me about his grandfather's rise through New York's underworld, the careful negotiations conducted in dialect-heavy Italian that law enforcement couldn't translate properly, about the parties where business deals were sealed over multi-course meals, and the wrong word could end a partnership or a life, about growing up, knowing that his family name carried weight, but never fully understanding why, until he was old enough to see the fear in people's eyes when they heard Salvatore. Say something in Sicilian, he said suddenly. Not a lesson. Just talk to me the way your grandmother talked to you. I switched languages mid-breath, letting the dialect flow out uncensored. Told him about Sunday dinners that lasted for hours, about my grandmother's friends gossiping in a kitchen thick with the smell of sauce and fresh bread, about learning that Sicilian wasn't just a language, but a whole philosophy of life expressed through food and family and fierce, protective love that sometimes looked like violence. Dominic listened with an intensity that made me self-conscious. Then he responded in Sicilian, and I heard it. The slight shift in his accent. The way he was starting to remember the rhythm of it. The particular way Catanese Sicilian turned certain vowels, softened certain consonants. He was still American in his pronunciation, but he was learning. More importantly, he was feeling it. You're getting better, I said, still in Sicilian. But you're thinking too much. Sicilian isn't a language you think in. It's a language you feel in. You have to let go of proper grammar and just let it happen. Show me how. He shifted closer on the futon, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body. Stop being a professor for 5 minutes and just be Sicilian. Talk to me the way you'd talk to family. So I did. I cursed at him for sitting too close, called him stronzo and testardo, and a dozen other words my grandmother had used when she was exasperated with someone she loved. I switched between insults and endearment so fast, it probably gave him whiplash, because that's how Sicilian works. You curse at someone 1 second and call them treasures the next. And the person listening has to be smart enough to understand that both come from the same place of fierce, complicated affection. Dominic started laughing halfway through my tirade. Not the controlled laugh from the gala, but something genuine and surprised and completely unguarded. You sound exactly like my grandmother, he said in English, then switched to Sicilian. She used to go off like that when my grandfather tracked mud through her clean kitchen. 10 minutes of creative cursing followed by forcing him to sit down and eat because she'd made his favorite pasta, and it would be a sin to waste it. That's very Sicilian, I agreed. We express love through food and insults in equal measure. Then you must love me very much, Professor. His eyes glinted with something dangerous. That was quite a lot of insults. The air between us changed, charged with possibility and danger, and all the things we were both pretending not to feel. We should call it a night, I said, but I didn't move away from him. It's almost midnight. You have work tomorrow. So do you. He didn't move either. But I don't want to leave yet. Dominic, say it in Sicilian. His voice dropped lower. Whatever you're about to say to push me away, say it in our language. Our language, as if Sicilian had become something shared between us, instead of something I was teaching him. And maybe it had. Maybe over the past 3 weeks, and especially tonight, we'd created something new. A private language made of half-remembered dialects, and shared stories, and all the complicated feelings we were both too smart to acknowledge out loud. Devi andare, I said softly in Sicilian. You have to go. This isn't what we agreed to. We agreed to stop pretending. He reached up and traced the line of my jaw with one finger, the touch feather-light but impossible to ignore. To be honest, to show each other who we really are. His hand dropped away. I'm trying to do that. Are you? Was I? Or was I still hiding behind Professor Brennan, using my credentials as armor against this man who saw through every defense I'd ever built? I'm scared, I admitted in English, because some truths were too big for any language. You're dangerous, not just because of what you do, but because of how you make me feel. Like I could lose myself completely and not even care. Good. He stood up, giving me space I wasn't sure I wanted. Fear means you're paying attention. Fear means you understand that this isn't a game. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. I'll see you Thursday for our next lesson. And Sophia? He switched to perfect Sicilian. Thank you for tonight. For letting me be myself. For remembering with me. He left before I could respond. The door clicked shut softly behind him, and suddenly my apartment felt enormous and empty, despite being exactly the same size it had always been. I cleaned up the dishes in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the evening. The way he'd looked at me, the sound of his laugh, the vulnerability in his voice when he talked about his family, the absolutely terrifying realization that somewhere between teaching him proper verb conjugations and cursing at him in my grandmother's dialect, I'd started falling for Dominic Salvatore, which was absolutely the worst idea I'd ever had. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but I knew who it was before I even opened it. Sogni d'oro, professoressa. Dream of Sicily. I did. Thursday's lesson happened at a restaurant in Little Italy that looked like it hadn't changed since 1965. Dominic was waiting at a corner table when I arrived, dressed casually again, but somehow still managing to look like he owned the place. Which, I was beginning to suspect, he probably did. This seems less than professional, I said, sliding into the chair across from him. You're the one who said we needed to learn through living. He poured me wine without asking. Consider this a cultural immersion exercise. My grandfather used to bring me here when I was a kid. The owner's family is from Catania. If you want to test my Sicilian, there's no better place. As if on cue, an elderly man appeared at our table. He looked at Dominic with the kind of familiarity that came from years of association. Then his eyes slid to me with open curiosity. Domenico, he said in heavily accented English. You bring a girl here? This must be serious. This is my Italian teacher, Marco. Dominic's eyes danced with amusement at my expression. Professor Brennan from Yale. Marco's eyebrows shot up. Yale, eh? Smart girl. He switched to rapid-fire Sicilian. Too smart for you, probably. What does a professor want with a boy like you? I responded in the same dialect before Dominic could. I'm teaching him to speak properly instead of like an Americano who thinks he's Sicilian because his grandmother made good pasta. Marco's face split into a huge grin. Oh, I like her. She's got spirit. Your grandmother would have approved. He clapped Dominic on the shoulder and rattled off something too fast for me to fully catch. But I heard the word matrimonio. Marriage. Dominic's cheeks actually colored slightly. Marco, please. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Marco winked at me. I'll send out the antipasto. You two practice your Italian, or whatever you want to call what you're doing. He bustled away, leaving us in awkward silence. I apologize for him, Dominic said. Marco has known me since I was 8. He thinks he has the right to comment on my personal life. Does he? I asked, genuinely curious. Have that right? In Sicilian families, everyone has that right. He leaned back, studying me. That's part of what you need to teach me. It's not just the language. It's understanding that privacy doesn't really exist the way Americans think it does. Everything is family business. Everything is discussed. And refusing to discuss something is often more telling than any answer you could give. That sounds exhausting. It is. He smiled. It's also comforting, knowing that everyone is invested in your life, that you're never truly alone, that your problems become everyone's problems, and everyone's problems become yours. He paused. Americans value independence. Sicilians value interdependence. It's a fundamental cultural difference. Over the next 2 hours and 6 courses of food, Dominic proved he'd been paying attention. He conversed with Marco in increasingly confident Sicilian, accepting the teasing and giving it back in equal measure. He told stories about his grandfather that had the old man nodding and adding his own memories, the two of them code-switching between Sicilian and Italian so fluidly I could barely keep up. But more importantly, I watched him transform, watched American businessman Dominic fade, and someone else emerge. Someone louder, more expressive, who talked with his hands and interrupted people and showed emotion without the careful control he usually maintained. This was who he would have been if his father hadn't tried to erase Sicily from their family. This was who he was learning to be again. "You're staring," he said in Sicilian, catching me mid-observation. "You're different here." I didn't bother denying it. More yourself. Or less myself. I'm not sure anymore. He switched to English, his voice dropping lower. "Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role. Like I'm pretending to be the man my grandfather wanted me to be instead of the man I actually am. Maybe you're both." I reached across the table and touched his hand without thinking. Maybe that's okay. His fingers threaded through mine, the gesture so natural I didn't immediately pull away. "Is that what you do? Be both versions of yourself?" "Every day." The admission came easier than it should have. "I'm Professor Brennan at Yale. Proper grammar, published research, serious academic. But I'm also Sophia, whose grandmother taught her that the most important things in life can't be found in books, that family matters more than credentials, that sometimes the most honest thing you can say is a creative curse word." "Which one is real?" "Both." I squeezed his hand. "Neither." "Does it matter?" "Yes." His intensity was back, focused entirely on me. "Because I need to know which one I'm falling for." My heart stopped, just completely stopped beating for 3 full seconds. "Dominic, don't." His thumb traced circles on my palm, the touch distracting and deliberate. "Don't tell me this is unprofessional or inappropriate or crossing boundaries. I know all that. I'm choosing to do it anyway." He switched to Sicilian, the words flowing out rough and honest. "I'm choosing you anyway." Marco appeared with dessert, took one look at our joined hands, and smiled like all his prayers had been answered. He set down cannoli and disappeared again, probably to start planning our wedding in his head. "This is a terrible idea," I said. but I didn't let go of his hand. Probably the worst one I've ever had. He lifted my hand and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, the gesture old-fashioned and devastating, but I've spent my entire life making calculated decisions, being strategic, doing what makes sense for business and family and maintaining power. His eyes met mine. This doesn't make sense. You don't make sense. And I don't care. You barely know me. I know you're brilliant and stubborn and brave enough to curse at me in my own grandmother's dialect. I know you see me, really see me, in a way no one else does. I know that when you speak Sicilian, something in my chest tightens because it sounds like home. He was still holding my hand, still looking at me like I was something precious and dangerous. I know enough. And when you go to Sicily, I had to ask. Had to face the reality of what this was. When you meet with the Cozzolino family and convince them you're Sicilian enough to do business with them, what happens to this then? That depends. His voice was careful now, measured. Come with me. I actually laughed. You want me to come to Sicily with you to meet a Mafia family? Are you insane? Completely. He wasn't joking, though. His face was dead serious. But think about it, Sophia. You're my teacher. It makes sense that you'd come with me to ensure my Italian is perfect for such an important meeting. No one would question it. Everyone would question it. Let them. He leaned forward. I'm asking you to come not because I need a teacher. I'm asking because I want you there. Because whatever happens with the Cozzolinos, I want to experience Sicily with someone who loves it the way I'm learning to love it again. Someone who understands what it means. It was romantic and absurd and potentially dangerous and absolutely insane. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to say no, to end this before it went any further, to remember that I was an academic and he was a criminal, and there was no universe where this ended well. When? I heard myself ask. 6 weeks. His expression shifted, hope and triumph mixing. The patriarch's birthday party, 3 days in Palermo. I've already arranged for... Stop. I held up my free hand. If I'm going to do this insane thing, I don't want to know about the arrangements. I don't want to know about security or who you're meeting with or what business you're conducting. I'm going as your teacher, to help you with the language. That's all. We both knew it was a lie. But it was a lie we could both live with. Agreed. He signaled Marco for the check. But between now and then, we intensify the lessons. No more textbooks at all. I need to be fluent in Catanese Sicilian. I need to understand every cultural nuance, every unspoken rule, I know what you need. I finally pulled my hand away, needing distance to think clearly. And I'll teach you. But Dominic, this thing between us, we need to be clear about what it is. What do you want it to be? Honest question, deserved an honest answer. I don't know yet. I met his eyes, but I know I can't think clearly when you're touching me. So if we're going to do this, teach you to be Sicilian enough to walk into that birthday party and convince people you belong, we need boundaries. Name them. No more hand-holding. No more looking at me like that. No more calling me at midnight to practice pronunciation. I'd been pretending those late-night calls were professional, but we both knew better. We focus on the work. When we get to Sicily, when you've done what you need to do, then we figure out what this is. He considered this for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. Okay, 6 weeks, all business, just teacher and student. He stood up, threw cash on the table without counting it. But Sophia, when we get to Sicily, when I've proven myself to the Cozzolinos, I'm done pretending. I'm done with boundaries. I want you, and I'm going to tell you that in every language we speak. He left me sitting there with cannoli I couldn't taste, and a heart that was beating entirely too fast. The next 6 weeks were the most intense of my life. We met every day, sometimes twice a day. Dominic absorbed Sicilian culture like a man dying of thirst. We watched old Italian films from the 50s and 60s, the ones his grandfather had loved. We cooked meals together in my tiny kitchen, and I taught him that the way you cut vegetables or stirred sauce said as much about you as your words. We practiced conversations about family and honor and respect, the topics that mattered most in the world he was trying to re-enter. And through it all, we maintained our boundaries. Barely. Painfully. The air between us crackled with everything we weren't saying, every touch we weren't allowing, every feeling we were carefully not acknowledging. My friends thought I'd lost my mind. My department chair was thrilled I'd found such a generous patron of the arts who was funding a research trip to Sicily. My mother called every other day to ask why I sounded different. Was something wrong? Was I seeing someone? You can tell me, Sophia. I told her I was fine. I told everyone I was fine. I was teaching Italian to a client. That's all. Nothing to worry about. I was lying to everyone, including myself. The night before our flight to Palermo, Dominic showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked exhausted, stressed in a way I'd never seen him. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "Nothing. Everything." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm ready. You've prepared me as well as anyone could. But Sophia, tomorrow we get on a plane and I take you into a world where people solve problems with violence, where saying the wrong thing to the wrong person could get us both killed. And I keep thinking maybe I shouldn't have asked you to come. Maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe..." I kissed him, just stepped forward, grabbed his face and kissed him to shut him up. To stop the spiral of doubt, to remind both of us why we were doing this insane thing. He froze for half a second, then his arms came around me, and he kissed me back like a man who'd been holding himself back for 6 weeks and had finally been given permission to let go. It was desperate and perfect, and tasted like everything we'd been denying. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. "So much for boundaries," he murmured. "We'll re-establish them tomorrow." I was lying again. We both knew it. On the plane, after we land, just, "Not tonight, not tonight," he agreed, and kissed me again. We didn't sleep that night. We talked until dawn, switching between English and Italian and Sicilian, saying all the things we'd been carefully not saying for 6 weeks. And when the sun came up and it was time to head to the airport, something fundamental had shifted between us. We were still teacher and student. We were still navigating dangerous territory. But we were also something else now, something neither of us could name but both of us felt. The plane lifted off, carrying us toward Sicily and whatever waited for us there. Dominic reached over and took my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. "Ready?" he asked in Sicilian. "Probably not," I answered in the same language. "But let's do it anyway." Palermo hit me like a physical force the moment we stepped off the plane. The November air was mild, carrying salt from the Mediterranean and the sweet decay of autumn flowers. The airport buzzed with rapid-fire Italian that bore only passing resemblance to the textbook phrases I'd taught to undergraduates. This was the real thing, messy and alive, and absolutely unforgiving of mistakes. Dominic's entire demeanor changed the moment we touched Sicilian ground. The American businessman I'd first met disappeared completely. In his place was someone I barely recognized. Looser, more animated, speaking in rapid Sicilian with the driver who picked us up in a sleek black Mercedes. He gestured with his hands when he talked. His laugh came easier. Even the way he held himself shifted, more comfortable in his own skin than I'd ever seen him. "You're staring again," he said in Sicilian, catching me watching him as we drove through Palermo's chaotic streets. "You're different here." I'd stopped pretending not to notice. "It's like you shed a layer. or put one on. He was watching the city pass by with hungry eyes. My grandfather used to say that Sicily doesn't let you hide. Either you belong or you don't, and everyone can tell within 5 minutes of meeting you. He glanced at me. We'll see if he was right. The hotel was in the old city, one of those converted palazzos that dripped with history and old money. Our rooms were on the same floor, connected by a door that remained diplomatically closed. We had 2 days before the birthday party, 2 days to acclimate, to practice, to make sure Dominic could walk into a room full of people who had known his grandfather and convince them he was worthy of the Salvatore name. No pressure at all. "Tell me about the Cozzolinos," I said that evening over dinner at a restaurant Dominic had chosen. Small, tucked away, the kind of place that didn't advertise because everyone who needed to know about it already did. Old family, very traditional. Dominic switched between languages unconsciously now. Italian when speaking to waiters, Sicilian when talking to me, as if we'd created our own private hybrid. The patriarch, Don Giuseppe, is 70. He controls the western ports and has connections throughout southern Italy. His sons are all in the business. His daughters married men from other families, creating alliances. He paused. My grandfather did business with his father back in the 50s. Giuseppe remembers. That history buys me a chance, but it doesn't guarantee anything. What do they want from you? Access to the American East Coast ports, a reliable partner who understands both worlds, someone they can trust not to fuck them over. His bluntness was refreshing. What they're afraid of is that I'm too American, that I've forgotten what it means to be Sicilian, that I'll make promises in Italian and break them in English. So you need to convince them you're Sicilian first, American second. I need to convince them I'm Sicilian, period. He leaned forward. American is what I do. Sicilian is what I am. That's what you've been teaching me, isn't it? How to access that part of myself I'd been trained to hide. He was right. Somewhere over the past 6 weeks, the lessons had stopped being about language and started being about identity. About helping Dominic Salvatore remember he wasn't just pretending to be Sicilian. He was Sicilian, raised by a grandfather who'd carried the culture across an ocean and tried to plant it in American soil, even as his own son had done everything possible to reject it. "Tomorrow," I said, "we visit your grandfather's neighborhood, where he grew up before he left for America. You need to see it, walk the streets, understand the world that shaped him. I already have someone arranged to show us." "No." I cut him off. "No fixers, no arranged tours, just us, getting lost, finding our way. That's how you learn a place. Not through careful planning, but through stumbling and recovering and paying attention." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. We do it your way." The next morning, we took a cab to the neighborhood where Salvatore Sr. had grown up. Catania's eastern district, the part tourists didn't visit because it was too real, too poor, too honest about what life in Sicily actually meant for most people. The buildings were old, stacked close together, laundry hanging from balconies, old women sitting in doorways watching everyone who passed with eyes that missed nothing. "My grandfather lived right there," Dominic said, pointing to a fourth-floor apartment with peeling paint and a window box full of herbs. He told me stories about racing down those stairs to get to school, about his mother yelling at him in Sicilian to come back and finish his breakfast. We walked slowly, letting the neighborhood reveal itself. Kids played soccer in a narrow street, using buildings as goals. An old man sat outside a cafe, arguing politics with whoever would listen, his voice rising and falling in theatrical passion. Somewhere someone was cooking, the smell of tomato and basil and garlic floating out open windows. "This is what my grandfather missed," Dominic said quietly. "Not the place itself, but the feeling of it. The sense that everyone belonged to everyone else. That your life was woven into the fabric of your neighbors' lives whether you wanted it to be or not." He turned to look at me. "That's what was missing in America. We had the food and the language, but not the connection. Not the sense that we were part of something larger than ourselves. You can't recreate that. I said it gently. What your grandfather had here, what my grandmother had in her neighborhood, it doesn't translate. You can't just transplant a culture and expect it to grow the same way. I know. He started walking again. But you can honor it, understand it, carry it with you even if you can't fully live it. We spent the entire day wandering. Dominic stopped to talk with old men who remembered the Salvatore family, who had stories about his grandfather as a boy. He bought coffee from a tiny cafe that had been there for 70 years. He helped an old woman carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs and accepted her blessing in return, her Sicilian so thick I could barely understand it. And I watched him become someone different with each interaction. Not pretending, not performing, but remembering. Like he was a photograph slowly developing, the image that had always been there finally becoming visible. That night, back at the hotel, he knocked on the connecting door between our rooms. I opened it to find him standing there in a t-shirt and jeans, hair still damp from the shower, looking younger and more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. "Thank you," he said. "For today. For showing me how to stop performing and just be. You did that yourself." I leaned against the door frame. "I just got you out of your own way. Sophia." He said my name like a prayer. "Tomorrow I walk into that birthday party, and I convince Don Giuseppe and his family that I'm worthy of doing business with them. And I can do that because of you. Because you saw something in me I'd forgotten was there. Dominic, let me finish." He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, I want you to know that these past weeks with you have been the most honest I've been with anyone in years. Maybe ever. You made me remember that being Sicilian isn't about where you were born. It's about how you carry yourself, how you treat people, how you honor the past while building something new." I reached up and touched his face, letting myself have this moment. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, we'd step into his world fully and see if he could hold his own. But tonight, in this hotel in Palermo, we could just be 2 people who'd found something unexpected in each other. "Come here," I said, pulling him into my room. We didn't talk about what it meant. Didn't discuss boundaries or appropriateness or any of the things we probably should have addressed. We just held each other, sharing space and breath, and the understanding that tomorrow we'd find out if everything we'd worked toward would be enough. The party was at the Cozzolino estate, a sprawling villa on the outskirts of Palermo that looked like something from a period film. Security everywhere, polite but thorough. Cars lined the long driveway, expensive and understated. This wasn't a place for flashy displays. This was old money, old power, old rules. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress that was elegant without being attention-grabbing. Dominic wore a suit that probably cost more than my car, but he wore it like he'd been born in it. We'd gone over the key phrases one last time in the car. The proper way to address Don Giuseppe, the names of his children and grandchildren, the history between their families. "Ready?" I asked as we approached the entrance. "Ask me in Sicilian." "Sei pronto?" "I was born ready, Professoressa." He took my hand. "Stay close. Let me introduce you. These people need to understand you're important to me." The party was exactly what I'd expected and somehow more. 3 generations of Cozzolino family and their associates, all dressed in their finest, all watching with predator eyes as new arrivals were assessed and judged. The Don sat in a place of honor, a man in his 70s with the bearing of someone who'd commanded respect his entire life and expected nothing less. Dominic navigated it all perfectly. He greeted people in Sicilian, his accent flawless now, his body language matching theirs. He told stories about his grandfather that had old men nodding in recognition. He knew when to be serious, and when to laugh, when to speak, and when to listen. And when we finally approached Don Giuseppe, when the moment came that everything had been building toward, Dominic didn't hesitate. He spoke in pure Catanese Sicilian, the dialect his grandfather had spoken, paying respects and honoring the history between their families. He acknowledged the Don's position without diminishing his own, and then, in a move that made my heart stop, he told a story about his grandfather and the Don's father, something he'd learned from one of the old men in the neighborhood the day before, a detail that proved he'd done more than rehearse lines. He'd actually connected with his grandfather's world. Don Giuseppe's face remained impassive throughout. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You have your grandfather's eyes," he said in Sicilian, and apparently his talent for remembering the important things. He glanced at me. "And who is this?" "Professor Sophia Brennan," Dominic said, pride clear in his voice. "She teaches Italian at Yale. She's been helping me remember how to speak properly." The Don looked at me with sharp eyes. "You teach this boy our language?" I reminded him he already knew it, I said in my best Sicilian. His grandfather taught him well. He just needed to remember. The old man laughed, a genuine sound that rippled through the nearby guests. "Smart girl. Beautiful, too. Your grandfather would have liked her, Domenico. She doesn't let you get away with anything." "No, sir," Dominic agreed. "She doesn't." We spent the next 3 hours at that party, and I watched Dominic Salvatore do the impossible. He walked into a room full of people who should have rejected him and made them accept him as one of their own. Not through force or money or power, but through understanding, through connection, through remembering what his grandfather had taught him about being Sicilian. Late in the evening, when most of the formalities were done and people had relaxed into genuine celebration, Dominic found me on the terrace overlooking the gardens. "We did it," he said quietly. "You did it," I corrected. "I just got you ready." "No." He took my hand. "We did it together. And Sophia? I don't want to stop. Not after tonight. Not ever." The next morning I woke up to sunlight streaming through hotel curtains and the sound of church bells somewhere in the distance. For a moment I forgot where I was, disoriented by the unfamiliar room, the quality of light, the way even the air felt different here. Then memory flooded back. Palermo, the party, Don Giuseppe's acceptance, Dominic's hand in mine as we'd left the villa, both of us knowing something fundamental had shifted, but neither willing to name it yet. My phone showed a message from Dominic. "Coffee? My room. We need to talk." I showered quickly, threw on jeans and a sweater, and knocked on the connecting door between our rooms. He opened it immediately, looking like he'd been awake for hours. 2 espresso cups sat on the small table by the window, steam still rising. "You're nervous," I observed, accepting the coffee he handed me. "Terrified." He said it with a slight smile, but I could see the truth in his eyes. Last night went better than I could have hoped. Don Giuseppe pulled me aside before we left. They want to do business. Real business. The kind of partnership my grandfather spent 20 years trying to build. That's good, isn't it? That's what you wanted. It's what my family needs. He set his cup down and turned to face me fully. But it means I'll be spending significant time here, in Sicily, building relationships, learning the business on their terms. It could be months before. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I'm trying to figure out how to ask you something without sounding completely insane." Too late for that. But my heart was hammering in my chest because I knew what was coming. Had known since that moment on the terrace last night, when he'd said he didn't want to stop. "Come back with me to New Haven. Pack up your apartment. Request a leave of absence from Yale." The words came out in a rush. "Come back here with me, not as my teacher, as whatever we are, whatever we're becoming. Help me navigate this new world." Stay with me. I should have said no. Should have explained all the reasons why this was impossible. My career, my students, the dissertation I still needed to defend, the fact that I barely knew him despite the intensity of the past 6 weeks, the reality that he was asking me to upend my entire life for something that might crash and burn within months. Instead, I heard myself say, "For how long?" Hope flared in his eyes. "However long you want. A month, a year, forever. I'll take whatever you're willing to give me." Dominic, I know it's insane. I know I'm asking too much. But Sophia, last night when we walked into that party together, when I introduced you and watched those men assess you and realize you weren't just some pretty American I'd brought along, that you actually understood our culture, our language, our way of thinking. He stepped closer. I realized I don't want to do this without you. Not the business, not Sicily, not any of it. You barely know me. But it was a weak protest and we both knew it. I know you're brilliant and stubborn and brave enough to tell me when I'm wrong. I know you code switch between 3 versions of yourself depending on who you're talking to, and they're all honest. They're all you. I know you curse at me when you're frustrated and it sounds like poetry. I know. He cupped my face in his hands. I know enough. My students can be taught by someone else. You're an adjunct, Sophia. You said yourself the pay is terrible and they'll replace you within a week. My dissertation can be written anywhere, especially here, where you'd have access to primary sources and native speakers and actual lived experience instead of academic theory. He had an answer for everything. Of course he did. Dominic Salvatore didn't ask questions unless he'd already figured out how to overcome every obstacle. What am I to you? I needed to hear him say it. Needed to understand what he was actually asking for. I don't have a word for it. His honesty was almost painful. In English or Italian or Sicilian, you're not my girlfriend. That's too casual. Not my employee. That's insulting to what we actually are. Not my partner. That implies business. And this is so much more than business. His thumbs traced my cheekbones. You're the person who sees me. Really sees me. The person I want to come home to. The person I want to build something with. Even though I'm not entirely sure what that something is yet. That's the least romantic declaration I've ever heard. But I was smiling despite myself. Then let me try in Sicilian. He switched languages, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. You're my person, the one I choose, the one I trust with the parts of myself I don't show anyone else, the one I want beside me when I'm building something new, the one whose opinion matters more than anyone else's. He paused. Come with me. Take this leap. See what we could be. I thought about my tiny studio apartment in New Haven, my unpaid position at Yale, my careful academic life built on safe choices and reasonable decisions. Then I thought about yesterday, wandering through Catanian streets with Dominic, watching him rediscover himself. Thought about last night, standing in a room full of dangerous men and helping him navigate a world I barely understood. Thought about the way I felt when he looked at me, like I was something precious and powerful and exactly what he needed. I need to go back to New Haven first, I said. Pack properly, talk to my department chair, figure out the logistics, give myself time to really think about what this means. His face fell slightly. Of course, I understand. I'm not saying no. I cut him off. I'm saying I need a week. 1 week to handle the practical matters and make sure I'm not making this decision just because I'm drunk on Sicilian air and good wine and the way you look at me. And after that week? He was holding his breath. After that week, if I still think this is a good idea, I'll come back. I kissed him softly. But Dominic, if I do this, we need to be clear about expectations. I'm not interested in being arm candy at business meetings or playing the supportive partner while you do dangerous things I don't understand. I need purpose, work, a reason to be here that isn't just you. Then teach. He said it like it was obvious. Teach at the university here, or start a language program for families who want their children to learn proper Italian and Sicilian, or, his eyes lit up, interview families like Don Giuseppe's, document their stories, write the dissertation you actually want to write, instead of the safe, academic one Yale expects. It was tempting, dangerously tempting. The kind of research that could actually mean something, instead of just adding another line to my CV. 1 week, I repeated. Let me go home and think. And if you change your mind in that week, if you realize this was just adrenaline and proximity and... I won't. His certainty was absolute. But take your week. Be sure. Because once you come back, I'm not letting you go easily. The week back in New Haven was surreal. My apartment felt smaller, shabbier, like I'd been gone for months instead of days. My department chair was surprisingly understanding about my request for a leave of absence, probably relieved to not have to find funding for another semester of my position. My friends oscillated between concern and excitement, unable to decide if I was making the best or worst decision of my life. My mother called 3 times a day. Sicily? With a man you've known for 6 weeks? Sophia Maria, have you lost your mind? Maybe I had. Probably I had. But for the first time in my very careful, very planned life, I was making a decision based on feeling instead of logic. And it felt terrifyingly right. I defended my dissertation proposal via Zoom from my apartment-turned-storage unit. The committee had questions about my sudden interest in fieldwork in Sicily. I explained that I'd discovered access to primary sources I hadn't known existed, that I wanted to document the linguistic evolution of Sicilian immigrant communities by studying the families who'd stayed in Sicily versus those who'd left. It was true, even if it wasn't the complete truth. They approved it, wished me luck, suggested I check in monthly with progress updates. That easily, my life in New Haven was packed into boxes and shipped to a storage unit. My car was sold to a grad student who was thrilled to get it despite the concerning noises. My lease was terminated. Everything I owned fit into 3 suitcases. On the 7th day, I boarded a flight back to Palermo. Dominic was waiting at the airport. He'd clearly been there for a while, judging by the empty espresso cup in his hand and the tension in his shoulders. When he saw me, his entire face transformed. "You came back," he said in Sicilian. "I came back," I agreed in the same language. He pulled me into his arms right there in the arrivals terminal, in front of everyone, and kissed me like a man who'd been holding his breath for a week and could finally breathe again. "I have something for you," he said, when we finally broke apart. He pulled out a small box, not a ring box, something else. Inside was a key. "It's to an apartment in the old city. 2 bedrooms, so you can have space for an office. Walking distance to the university. Month-to-month lease so you can leave if you decide this was a terrible idea." "You rented me an apartment?" I didn't know whether to be touched or insulted. "I rented us an apartment." His correction was gentle. "I'll stay in my place, or I'll stay with you, whatever you're comfortable with. But I wanted you to have space that's yours, so you never feel trapped, so you always have the option to walk away if you need to." It was possibly the most thoughtful thing anyone had ever done for me. "Show me," I said. The apartment was perfect. Old building, modern updates, a balcony that looked out over red tile roofs to the Mediterranean beyond. The 2nd bedroom had a desk and bookshelves and everything I'd need for research and writing. The kitchen was small but functional. The whole place felt like possibility. "I love it," I admitted. "Good." He set my suitcases down. "Because I have a confession. I may have already told Don Giuseppe's wife that you're researching Sicilian family histories, and she's been calling every woman she knows to volunteer for interviews, I think you have about 15 appointments lined up already. I stared at him. You did what? Created demand for your research? He looked entirely unrepentant. Sophia, you're brilliant. Your work matters. These women have stories that deserve to be documented. I just facilitated the connection. You manipulated the situation. But I was smiling despite myself. I created an opportunity. He pulled me close. There's a difference. Over the next 6 months, I discovered that life in Sicily was nothing like I'd imagined and everything I'd needed. I interviewed dozens of women from families like Don Giuseppe's, documenting how they maintained Sicilian language and culture across generations. Their stories were rich and complex and often darkly funny. These women who'd spent their lives beside dangerous men but wielded their own quiet power through family connections and cultural knowledge. My dissertation took shape in ways my Yale committee never expected. Instead of dry academic analysis, it became a living portrait of how language and identity intertwined, how women preserved culture even as their husbands and sons adapted to change, how Sicilian evolved in isolation versus in immigrant communities. Dominic built his business relationships, spending long days in meetings and negotiations that he never fully explained, and I never quite asked about. We'd established an understanding. I didn't inquire too deeply about his work, and he didn't censor himself when he needed to talk. Sometimes he came home tense and angry, switching between languages rapidly as he processed difficult conversations. Sometimes he came home triumphant, pulling me into his arms and spinning me around the apartment. We learned each other's rhythms, how he needed space after difficult meetings, how I needed quiet in the mornings before I could face human interaction, how we both reverted to Sicilian when emotions ran high, because somehow it was easier to be honest in a language that felt slightly removed from our everyday selves. I have news, he said one evening in October, 6 months after I'd moved to Palermo. We were on the balcony, watching the sunset over the Mediterranean, drinking wine and speaking in our hybrid of Italian and Sicilian and English. Good news or complicated news? I'd learned to read his tone. Both. He set his glass down. The Cozzolinos want to expand the partnership, not just shipping, investment opportunities, real estate. It's everything my grandfather worked toward, everything my family needs. That's wonderful. I meant it. What's the complicated part? It means more time here, maybe permanent. Don Giuseppe suggested I consider making Sicily my home base rather than New Haven. He turned to look at me. I told him I needed to discuss it with you first. My heart squeezed. 6 months ago, he'd made decisions and asked me to follow. Now he was consulting me, treating me as an equal partner in whatever this life was becoming. What do you want? I asked. I want to build something here, not just business. A life. The kind of life my grandfather dreamed of, connected to Sicily, but not trapped by it. He took my hand. But only if you want that too. Only if you can see yourself here long term. I thought about New Haven, about the academic career I'd put on hold, about the safe, predictable life I'd left behind. Then I thought about the past 6 months, the research that actually mattered, the women whose stories I was documenting, the community I'd found in this complicated, beautiful, dangerous place. The man who'd seen something in me I hadn't known was there, and helped me become it. I need to defend my dissertation first, I said slowly. Go back to Yale, complete what I started. But after that? I squeezed his hand. After that, yes. We build something here together. His smile was brilliant. When? 2 months. I can be done in 2 months if I work hard. Then I'm coming with you. He said it like it was obvious. You came to Sicily with me. I can come to New Haven with you. Besides, his eyes glinted with mischief. I've never seen you in professor mode, defending your dissertation in front of your committee. I want to watch you be brilliant and terrifying in academic speak. It's really boring, actually. Nothing about you is boring, Professoressa. He pulled me onto his lap, and I want to be there when you prove to those people who underestimated you that you're exactly as brilliant as I've known you were from the moment you corrected my pronunciation within 5 minutes of meeting me. 2 months later, I stood in front of my dissertation committee at Yale, defending a project that was so different from what I'd originally proposed they'd needed 3 meetings just to figure out how to evaluate it. But the research was solid. The analysis was sharp. The stories I documented were powerful and moving and academically rigorous. Dominic sat in the back of the room, having flown in from Palermo specifically for this. He wore a suit, but he'd insisted on staying in character as Sophia's Italian client who funded her research, which made several of my committee members very interested in having similar clients. When it came time for questions, one of my older professors, a man who'd never quite approved of my methods, leaned forward. Professor Brennan, your work is impressive, but I have to ask, isn't there a conflict of interest? You're romantically involved with a man from one of the families you studied. How can we trust your objectivity? Before I could respond, Dominic stood up. In perfect academic English, he said, "If I may address that concern." The committee looked startled, but nodded. Miss Brennan's research began before our personal relationship did. Every interview was conducted with proper academic protocols. Every conclusion she draws is supported by linguistic evidence and ethnographic data. He paused. What you're really asking is whether she maintained professional boundaries while embedded in a community that welcomed her as family. The answer is yes. Because Professor Brennan understands something that perhaps some academics forget. You can be part of a community and still observe it honestly. In fact, that position allows for insights that pure objectivity never could. The room was silent. Then my advisor, bless her, started clapping. The committee approved my dissertation, with honors, and suggestions that I turn it into a book. That night, Dominic took me to the one nice Italian restaurant in New Haven, the one that tried very hard to be authentic and mostly succeeded. "You were incredible today," he said in Sicilian, because we'd long since stopped pretending we were anything other than what we were. Terrifying, brilliant, everything I knew you would be. You shouldn't have stood up for me like that. But I was smiling. That's not how academic defenses work. I don't care how they work. He reached across the table and took my hand. I care about you, and anyone who questions your integrity is going to hear from me. Very Sicilian of you. I learned from the best. He was still holding my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. Sophia, I need to tell you something, and I need to say it in Sicilian, because that's the only language that feels honest enough for this. He switched fully to the Catanese dialect my grandmother had taught me, the language that had brought us together. You taught me to remember who I am. You helped me find my way back to a part of myself I'd lost. You're the smartest person I know, and the bravest and the most stubborn. He smiled. And I love you. I've loved you since the night you cooked for me in your tiny apartment and cursed at me for sitting too close. I just needed to be sure before I said it. My throat tightened. You needed to be sure? That I wasn't just in love with the idea of you, that this was real and lasting and something I could build a life around. His eyes held mine. I'm sure. You make me want to be the man my grandfather hoped I'd become. Not through force or obligation, but because you make me believe that version of myself is possible. Dominic, I know you have concerns about what I do, about the world I live in, about the danger and the moral ambiguity and all of it. He squeezed my hand. I can't change that. It's who I am, who my family is. But I can promise that I will never lie to you. Never put you in danger without warning. Never ask you to compromise your principles for my convenience. I love you too, I said quietly. In case that wasn't obvious from me upending my entire life to move to Sicily with you. Say it in Sicilian. His voice was rough with emotion. Please. So I did. Told him in my grandmother's language that I loved him. That he was mine. That wherever he was building his life, I wanted to be part of it. That together we were creating something new. Not purely Sicilian or American, but something hybrid and strong and entirely our own. He kissed me right there in the restaurant, in front of everyone, like a man who'd just been given everything he'd ever wanted. 3 weeks later, we were back in Palermo. But this time it was permanent. This time we were building something that would last. I turned my dissertation into a book, started teaching at the university, continued interviewing women whose stories deserved to be told, became part of the community in ways that surprised both of us. These families who'd accepted me first as Dominic's teacher, then as his partner, and finally as someone who belonged in her own right. And Dominic built his empire, not through violence or force, but through understanding, through bridging worlds, through remembering that being Sicilian wasn't about where you were born, but how you carried yourself, how you honored the past while creating something new. On our 1-year anniversary of that first night in my New Haven apartment, when he'd shown up asking for help, and I'd foolishly thought this would be a simple tutoring job, Dominic took me back to his grandfather's neighborhood in Catania. There's something I need to do, he said, and I want you with me. We climbed the stairs to his grandfather's old apartment, now occupied by a young family who'd heard the Salvatore name and welcomed us warmly. And there, in the tiny kitchen where his grandfather had learned to cook, where 3 generations of Sicilians had lived and fought and loved, Dominic got down on one knee. I should do this in English, he said, or proper Italian. Make it romantic and official. Then he switched to Sicilian. But this is the language that brought us together. The language you taught me to speak with my heart, instead of my head. So I'm going to ask you in the language that matters most. He asked me to marry him in perfect Catanese Sicilian, the dialect his grandfather had spoken, that my grandmother had taught me, that had become our private language for the most important truths. I said yes in the same language. Because some things can only be said properly in the tongue your grandmother taught you. In the words that carry generations of love and stubbornness and fierce protective joy. We got married 6 months later, in a ceremony that blended American and Sicilian traditions, in ways that made both our families cry. Don Giuseppe came, bringing half of Palermo with him. My mother came, bringing her skepticism and gradually losing it as she watched me navigate these dangerous waters with confidence and joy. And my grandmother's ghost probably watched from wherever good Sicilian women go when they die, shaking her head and laughing at the mess her granddaughter had made of her careful, academic life. But it was a beautiful mess. The kind built on language and trust and 2 people who'd found each other across the gap between who they were supposed to be and who they actually were. The kind that starts with an insult muttered in Sicilian and ends with a life built in 2 languages, 3 countries, and infinite possibilities.